Did you know that in 1700, India was worth a staggering $21 trillion by today's standards? The country was ruled by the Mughal Empire. Its economy was so large and so powerful that it was bigger than all of Western Europe's combined. 250 years later, India was one of the poorest countries in the world. So what went wrong? It all started with a single British ship docking in Surat in 1608. By the mid-20th century, an estimated $45 trillion had been stolen from India, and an estimated 35 million people had died in multiple famines. How did the men from an island 13 times smaller than India loot and plunder the country and get away with it? It wasn't the British government that seized India, but a small private company headquartered in a tiny office in London. The private company went on to become one of the most powerful corporations the world has ever known. It went on to conquer large parts of South Asia and command an army of 250,000 men. This is how it all began. By the 17th century, Spain and Portugal controlled a monopoly on goods from the East. But Britain wanted in so they could trade in cotton, silk, spices, and tea. Queen Elizabeth I signed a royal charter allowing a group of Englishmen to sail to the East Indies on behalf of the Crown. And so the British East India Company was born. In 1613, the first British factory was set up in Surat, but the company wasn't your conventional business. They had a private army. By 1757, as the Mughal dynasty went into decline, the company waged war on the last Nawab of Bengal and his French allies. They seized control of the entire state of Bengal. The state was ravaged by war, then by famine. Robert Clive, a company man, became the governor of the state, draining its wealth. The entire Bengal treasury was loaded onto 100 boats and sent down the Ganges and onward to the company's Calcutta headquarters. They collected taxes and customs from local Indians, which were then used to purchase Indian goods and export them to England. Wait, so this means that they took over the land, charged local people to live there, and then used the money to get rich? Yep, that's exactly it. The year 1858 marked a major turning point in India's history. After the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the British East India Company was abolished, and direct control passed to the British Crown. Queen Victoria issued her proclamation, promising justice, equality, and respect for Indian traditions. She declared, "We hold ourselves bound to the natives of our Indian territories by the same obligations of duty which bind us to all our other subjects." But behind the words of fairness lay a different reality. The British government continued to exploit India's wealth through trade and resource extraction. Exports of raw materials from India grew by nearly 50%, while imports of British goods doubled. The so-called partnership between India and Britain became one-sided. India supplied raw goods, and Britain took the profits. This moment set the stage for an unequal economic relationship that would last nearly a century. British rule in India created deep economic interdependence through a set of deliberate policies. In 1793, Lord Cornwallis introduced the permanent settlement of Bengal. It fixed land taxes permanently, turning zamindars into powerful landlords and peasants into lifelong debtors. Later, new systems appeared in different regions. The Rayatwari system of the 1820s in Madras and Bombay taxed farmers directly, while the Mahalwari system of the 1830s in the Northwest taxed entire villages. These policies brought steady revenue for Britain, but pushed Indian farmers into exploitation and poverty. Governors such as Lord Lytton and Lord Curzon added even more economic pressure. Between 1876 and 1880, Lord Lytton imposed a uniform salt tax that burdened India's poorest families. In 1899, Lord Curzon introduced the gold standard, which stabilized British trade but devalued Indian currency by 15 to 20%. All of these structures made India Britain's economic periphery. India exported raw materials such as cotton and opium, and in return imported British manufactured goods, creating a one-way economic flow. The results were dramatic. By 1900, Britain imported 120 million pounds worth of raw goods from India every year, but exported back only about 60 million in manufactured goods. India's own industries collapsed. Textile exports fell sharply, and the country's share of world manufacturing dropped from 25% in 1750 to less than 2% by 1900. The policies built an unequal system, one that enriched Britain while draining India's resources and economy. The economic policies of British rule caused devastating effects on India's industries, agriculture, and population. Deindustrialization destroyed India's once powerful textile sector. By 1900, handloom employment had dropped by 60%, and India's share of world textile exports fell from 25% in 1750 to almost zero by 1947. Agriculture also changed dramatically. Farmers were forced to grow cash crops such as indigo, cotton, and opium instead of food. This shift led to massive famines. The Great Famine of 1876 to 1878 killed between 5 and 10 million people. Under Lord Lytton's rule, as food was exported to Britain. Decades later, the Bengal famine of 1943 took up to 4 million lives, when 60 to 70% of Bengal's rice was diverted for British war efforts. Economic data shows how severe this dependency became. Between 1900 and 1947, India's GDP per capita grew only by 0.1 to 0.2% per year, leaving nearly 80% of Indians in poverty. Indian economist Dadabhai Naoroji called this the drain of wealth, a system where Britain extracted India's surplus revenue, leaving, as he said, nothing for the people but poverty and famine. Modern research estimates that Britain drained the equivalent of $45 trillion from India's economy to fund its empire. Under British rule, India saw new railways, telegraphs, and schools, but these were not built for the people. They were built to move raw materials faster to British ports and markets. Railways helped export cotton, coal, and opium, while Indian passengers paid the cost. Education was limited to producing clerks and translators for the colonial government. Even modern industries like steel and mining were owned and managed by the British. The empire called this progress, but it was progress for Britain, not for India. By 1947, India had railways, ports, and cities, but still over 70% of its people lived in poverty. The colonial system had built infrastructure that was not sustainable. It served extraction, not development. The legacy of that system still shapes India today. A reminder that growth without equality can never be truly sustainable.